The fake army that fooled Hitler. In the spring of 1944, Adolf Hitler was waiting for the largest invasion in history. He knew it was coming. He knew the Allies were somewhere across the English Channel. He knew that thousands of ships, aircraft, soldiers, tanks, and guns were preparing to smash into occupied Europe. But he did not know where. And that single question became one of the most important questions of the Second World War. Where would the Allies land? Normandy or Calais? So the Allies built an answer for him. They built roads for an army that did not exist. They broadcast radio messages for units that had no soldiers. They placed one of the most famous American generals in command of a force that was mostly a lie. And then they used captured German spies to tell Hitler exactly what he wanted to hear. This is the story of Operation Fortitude, the fake army that helped save D-Day. By 1944, Nazi Germany still controlled much of Western Europe. The Soviet Union was fighting a brutal war in the east. Italy had become a battlefield in the south. But to truly break Hitler's grip on Europe, the Allies needed to open a new front in the west. That meant crossing the English Channel. And crossing the Channel was not like crossing a river. An invasion needed more than brave soldiers. It needed ports, beaches, weather, tides, aircraft, naval guns, fuel, medical stations, bridges, roads, and a mountain of supplies. Every detail had to arrive at the right place, at the right time, in the right order. If the first wave failed, the second wave might never reach the shore. If the beaches became jammed, the army could drown in its own traffic. If German reserves arrived too quickly, the Allies could be pushed back into the sea. The real target would be Normandy. But Normandy was not the obvious target. The obvious target was Pas-de-Calais. Calais was the shortest crossing from England to France. It was closer to Germany. It had roads and railways that led deeper into Europe. To German commanders, it made sense. And because it made sense, the Allies decided to make it look even more obvious. The plan was not simply to hide Normandy. The plan was to make Calais shine so brightly in Hitler's mind that he would look straight past the real invasion. To understand why this mattered, imagine the German problem. The German army could not defend every beach with equal strength. The coastline was too long. The Allies had too many possible landing points. And the German commanders had to make decisions before they had perfect information. If they guessed wrong, they might waste their strongest units in the wrong place. If they guessed right, they might throw the invasion back into the sea. That is why the battle began long before the first landing craft touched the sand. It began inside maps. It began inside reports. It began inside the minds of men trying to predict the future. The Allies understood something simple and deadly. A commander does not move armies based only on what is true. He moves armies based on what he believes is true. So the Allies did not need to change reality everywhere. They needed to change belief in the right headquarters at the right time. They needed German commanders to hesitate. They needed them to wait. They needed them to ask, what if Normandy is only the beginning? What if the real hammer blow is still coming at Calais? The deception was part of a larger plan called Operation Bodyguard. Its job was to protect Operation Overlord, the real invasion of Normandy. Inside Bodyguard was a deception plan called Operation Fortitude. Fortitude had two major stories. Fortitude North suggested that the Allies might attack Norway. Fortitude South suggested that the real invasion would come at Pas-de-Calais. The northern story helped stretch German attention, but the southern story was the masterpiece. It was not a random lie. It was built around geography. From the white cliffs of Dover to the coast near Calais, the channel is narrow. On a clear day, the enemy coast almost feels close enough to touch. For centuries, that narrow water had been the natural doorway between Britain and the continent. If an invasion army wanted the shortest crossing, Calais looked right. If an invasion army wanted to reach Germany faster, Calais looked right. If an invasion army wanted to seize ports, roads, and railways, Calais looked right. That was the beauty of the deception. The Allies were not trying to make the Germans believe something foolish. They were encouraging them to believe something reasonable. And reasonable lies are the most dangerous kind. The Allies would invent an army group in southeast England. It would be huge. It would be loud. It would be pointed directly at Calais. And it would have the perfect commander, General George S. Patton. Patton was aggressive, famous, and respected by the Germans. If the Allies were going to make their most powerful attack, many German officers believed Patton would be involved. So the Allies used that belief like a weapon. They created the first United States Army Group, often called FUSAG. On paper, it looked like a massive force gathering in Kent and Sussex, the part of England closest to Calais. In reality, much of it was imaginary. But in war, a thing does not always need to be real. Sometimes, it only needs to be believed. That belief had to be built layer by layer. One report would not be enough. One fake tank would not be enough. One strange radio message would not be enough. But if German intelligence received a report from a spy, then saw aircraft photographs that seemed to match it, then intercepted radio traffic that seemed to confirm it, then watched Patton appear in the right place, the lie became harder to separate from the truth. Each piece supported the next. The fake army became like a stage set seen from far away. Up close, the walls were painted wood. From the audience, under the lights, it looked like a city. The most famous part of the deception was the physical trickery. Dummy tanks, dummy trucks, dummy landing craft, fake camps, fake roads, fake signs, fake activity. From the sky, a fake tank could look real enough. Not perfect, not if you stood beside it. But German reconnaissance aircraft were not landing in English fields to inspect the paintwork. They were flying high, fast, and afraid of being shot down. They saw shapes. They saw shadows. They saw patterns. And patterns were what the Allies wanted to give them. There is a strange courage in this kind of work. It is not the courage of charging a bunker. It is the courage of tiny details. The courage to trust that a shadow in a field, a false road sign, a carefully timed radio message, and a rumor passed through the right channel might change the movement of real divisions. Most people imagine war as explosions and battles. But war is also paperwork. War is logistics. War is suspicion. War is a colonel looking at a blurred photograph and deciding whether those black shapes are tanks or tricks. Operation Fortitude lived in that uncertainty. It fed uncertainty. It shaped uncertainty. And then it pointed uncertainty toward Calais. The trick was not to create a perfect army. The trick was to create the impression of one. An army is not just tanks. It is movement. It is radio traffic. It is rumors. It is officers arriving at headquarters. It is restricted roads and guarded gates. It is supply dumps, fuel depots, maps, telephone lines, and 1,000 tiny signals that say, something big is happening here. So the Allies staged a kind of military theater. They let some things be seen. They hid other things carefully. They created just enough evidence for German intelligence to connect the dots. But the dots were arranged to draw the wrong picture. And yet, the rubber tanks were only the beginning. Because a fake army made of props can be doubted. A fake army confirmed by trusted spies is much harder to ignore. Before the war, Germany believed it had spies inside Britain. By 1944, that belief was one of its greatest weaknesses. British intelligence had captured, turned, or controlled many of the German agents sent to the United Kingdom. This became known as the double-cross system. The name was almost a joke. Double-cross. The spies who were supposed to serve Germany were now feeding information to Germany on behalf of Britain. Some agents were real people. Some networks were invented. Some reports were mostly true. Some were carefully false. And the best lies were not ridiculous. They were believable. A bad deception says, "Believe this impossible thing." A good deception says, "Here are 10 things you already expect, and one small thing you should accept with them." That was the genius of double-cross. The Allies did not simply shout, "Calais, Calais, Calais!" They allowed German intelligence to discover Calais for itself. One of the most important agents was Juan Pujol Garcia, known by the British codename Garbo. Garbo was extraordinary because he had created an imaginary spy network so convincing that German intelligence believed it was real. Garbo's story sounds almost impossible. He was not the kind of spy most people imagine. He did not begin as a glamorous secret agent with a perfect cover and a suitcase full of gadgets. He was a man with imagination, patience, and an unusual hatred of fascism. Before British intelligence fully accepted him, he had already been inventing reports for the Germans from outside Britain. He used public information, maps, timetables, guidebooks, and creativity to make it seem as if he had sources on the ground. And because his lies were detailed, patient, and often mixed with harmless truth, they became convincing. By the time D-Day approached, Garbo was not just one agent. To the Germans, he appeared to control a network of people who seemed to see ports, camps, movement, and military preparation across Britain. But many of those people existed only on paper. They were ghosts reporting to a ghost army. He invented sub-agents, he invented reports, he invented delays and excuses. And the Germans trusted him. For Operation Fortitude, that trust became priceless. Garbo and other double agents helped build the picture that the Allies wanted Germany to see. They did not say Normandy was impossible. They suggested Normandy might be a diversion. They suggested Calais was still the main target. And after D-Day began, that second lie became even more important than the first. That is what made the deception so elegant. A simple lie breaks when reality appears. If you say there will be no landing in Normandy, and then the landing happens, the lie is dead. But Fortitude was more flexible. It allowed Normandy to happen. It gave Normandy a place inside the false story. Normandy could be real, and Calais could still be more important. Normandy could be bloody, loud, and terrifying, and German commanders could still wonder whether it was only the first act. This gave the lie a second life. And in the days after June 6th, that second life mattered enormously. To sell the fake army, the Allies needed a star. That star was General George S. Patton. Patton was exactly the kind of commander Germany expected to lead a major attack. He was bold, he was theatrical. He had already fought in North Africa and Sicily, and he had a reputation for speed and aggression. In deception, reputation matters. If an unknown general had been placed in command of the supposed invasion force, German analysts might have shrugged. But Patton? Patton made the fake army feel dangerous. Patton made it feel important. Patton made Calais feel like the main event. He also gave the fake army a personality. A list of imaginary divisions is dry. A phantom headquarters is abstract. But attach those divisions to Patton, and suddenly the story has a face. German intelligence could imagine him planning, moving, waiting for his moment. They could imagine that the loud, aggressive American general was being saved for the decisive attack. And because they expected a decisive attack near Calais, Patton became the perfect actor in a performance written for the enemy's imagination. He did not need to lead the fake army into battle. He only needed to make the fake army feel like the kind of army he would lead. The Allies were not only deceiving German eyes, they were deceiving German expectations. And expectation is powerful. If someone already believes a thing should happen, they need far less evidence to accept that it is happening. Calais looked logical. Patton looked logical. A massive army in southeast England looked logical. So German intelligence built a logical answer from false material. That was exactly what the Allies needed. Not for one day, not only before the invasion. They needed Germany to keep believing after the first soldiers landed in Normandy. On the night of June 5, 1944, the real invasion force moved toward Normandy. The sea was rough. The sky was uncertain. Thousands of men waited in landing craft, many seasick, many silent, many wondering if they would survive the morning. This is the part of the story that the fake tanks can make us forget. Operation Fortitude was clever. It was strange. It was sometimes almost funny. But it existed because real people were about to run into real gunfire. Every German division held away from Normandy mattered. Every hour of confusion mattered. Every delayed order mattered. For the men in the boats, deception was not an abstract intelligence success. It could be the difference between facing one enemy unit or three. It could be the difference between a counterattack arriving in hours or arriving too late. It could be the difference between a narrow strip of beach becoming a foothold or becoming a disaster. The soldiers heading toward Normandy did not need to know every detail of Fortitude. They did not need to know every false report, every double agent, every phantom unit. But they were depending on all of it. They were depending on planners they would never meet. They were depending on code breakers in quiet rooms. They were depending on agents writing messages that sounded loyal to Germany while secretly serving the Allied cause. They were depending on the strange power of a lie told for the right reason. And as the real invasion moved through the darkness, other deceptions supported it. Aircraft dropped metal strips to confuse radar. Small boats and planes helped create false impressions along other parts of the coast. Radio traffic added noise to the picture. The Allies wanted German commanders to see not one clear invasion, but shadows everywhere. Then, in the early hours of June 6th, the first Allied troops landed in Normandy. Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juno, Sword. D-Day had begun. And now Operation Fortitude faced its most dangerous test. Could the Allies convince Hitler that the real invasion was not the real invasion? Think about how fragile that moment was. The beaches were not instantly secure. The first day was chaos. Units landed in the wrong places. Radios failed. Men were separated from their officers. Some tanks sank before reaching shore. Some landing craft were destroyed. On Omaha Beach especially, the fighting was brutal. For hours, success was not guaranteed. If German commanders had quickly understood that Normandy was the main invasion, and if reserves had moved with full force and full confidence, the Allied position could have become even more desperate. This is why Fortitude did not end on the morning of June 6th. In a way, that morning was when the deception became most important. Once the Allies landed in Normandy, the deception could have collapsed. After all, German commanders could point to the beaches and say, There, that is the invasion. But Fortitude had prepared a second story. Normandy was not the main attack. Normandy was the opening move. The real blow was still coming at Calais. This was the most brilliant part of the plan. Before D-Day, the Allies wanted Germany to expect Calais. After D-Day, they wanted Germany to keep expecting Calais. That meant the fake army could not disappear the moment the real army landed. Fussig had to remain alive. Patton had to remain a threat. The radio traffic had to continue. The double agents had to keep feeding the story. To German commanders, this made a disturbing kind of sense. Maybe Normandy was too far from the shortest crossing. Maybe it was meant to draw reserves away. Maybe the Allies were waiting to attack Calais once Germany reacted. Maybe Patton's army was still coming. And so German forces that might have been sent quickly to crush the Normandy beachhead were held back, watched, delayed, or misdirected. The Allies did not need the lie to last forever. They needed it to last long enough. Long enough to land more men, long enough to unload more tanks, long enough to push inland, long enough for a beachhead to become an army. In the first hours and days after D-Day, time was everything. Fortitude helped buy time, and time in an invasion becomes physical. Time becomes another landing craft reaching the beach. Time becomes another tank rolling off a ship. Time becomes engineers clearing mines. Time becomes medics setting up aid stations. Time becomes artillery arriving, fuel arriving, food arriving, commanders finding their units, roads being opened, bridges being repaired, and frightened men becoming an organized army. A beachhead is not born strong. It must be fed. It must be protected. It must survive its first fragile days. Fortitude helped give Normandy those days. So why did the fake army work? Not because of one trick, because of many tricks supporting each other. First, the target made sense. Calais was the shortest route across the Channel. If you were sitting in a German headquarters, expecting Calais was not foolish. It was reasonable. Second, the Allies gave the Germans evidence they could interpret themselves. They did not simply announce the lie. They built clues. Clues in the air, clues on the ground, clues in radio traffic, clues from agents Germany believed it controlled. Third, the Allies used truth as glue. Some real units were visible. Some real activity happened in the right places. Some messages were accurate enough to make the false messages feel reliable. A lie wrapped in truth is harder to unwrap. Fourth, the Allies understood Hitler's expectations. Hitler already feared Calais. German defenses were already strong there. German planning already treated it as a likely target. Fortitude did not create the idea from nothing. It fed an idea that already existed. This is one of the great lessons of the operation. The best deception does not usually invent a completely new world. It bends the world your enemy already sees. It finds a fear that already exists and gives it evidence. It finds a guess that already feels logical and makes it feel certain. It finds a blind spot and quietly builds a road through it. In 1944, Calais was that blind spot. Not because the Germans were stupid, but because Calais made sense. And when something makes sense, people stop questioning it too soon. And fifth, the Allies had feedback. Through code breaking and intelligence, they could often understand how German commanders were reacting. That meant deception was not just a message sent into darkness. It was a conversation. The Allies lied. Germany reacted. The Allies adjusted. In modern terms,
Operation Fortitude was not just fake props. It was a system.
A system of psychology, theater, intelligence, and timing. And that is why it was dangerous. Because it did not only fool the eyes, it fooled the decision-making process. That is why the story still matters. It is not only a story about inflatable tanks, it is a story about attention. Where does the enemy look? What does the enemy expect? Which signals does the enemy trust? Which doubts can be planted? Which belief can be made too comfortable to abandon? The Allies won a small but crucial battle inside the German mind before they fought the enormous battle on the beaches. They made the wrong answer feel safer than the right one. There is something almost absurd about a fake army. A tank that can be carried by a few men. A landing craft that might collapse if you touch it in the wrong place. An entire army group that lives in files, radio messages, and enemy imagination. It sounds like a prank, but it was not a prank. It was a shield made of lies. Behind that shield were real soldiers. Real ships. Real nurses. Real engineers. Real paratroopers dropping into the dark. Real families waiting for letters that might never come. The strange thing about deception in war is that it can save lives by telling lies. It can turn imagination into armor. It can make an enemy guard the wrong beach. It can make a commander hesitate. And sometimes, hesitation is enough. But deception also has a cost. It requires secrecy. It requires patience. It requires people to do work that may never be publicly celebrated. The person inflating a dummy tank might never know which German report mentioned it. The radio operator sending false traffic might never know which enemy analyst believed it. The intelligence officer approving one carefully written message might never see the battlefield consequence. The success of the trick is often invisible. No one can point to a single moment and say, "This exact lie saved this exact life." But when the pattern is seen from above, the purpose becomes clear. The fake army did not replace courage on the beaches. It gave that courage a better chance. Eventually, the truth became impossible to hide. The Allied foothold in Normandy grew stronger. More men and supplies poured into France. The battle moved inland. The fake army had done its work. The phantom formations faded. The false signals stopped. The imaginary invasion of Calais never came. But by then, it no longer needed to. Operation Fortitude did not win the war by itself. No deception plan does. D-Day was won by sailors, soldiers, airmen, engineers, planners, resistance fighters, medics, code breakers, and countless people whose names are not famous. But Fortitude helped make the impossible possible. It helped convince Hitler to look in the wrong direction at the most important moment. And it showed one of the strangest truths in military history. Sometimes the most powerful army is the one your enemy only thinks exists. The army was fake. The fear was real. And for a few crucial weeks in 1944, that was enough to change history.